The Quantum Frontiers Conference in San Francisco had drawn the brightest minds in technology and theoretical physics. The grand ballroom of the Moscone Center hummed with anticipation as attendees settled into their seats. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long rectangles of light across the polished stage where a single podium stood beside two leather armchairs. The air itself seemed charged with intellectual electricity as conversations about quantum computing and space exploration rippled through the crowd of 3,000. At precisely 2 o'clock, the house lights dimmed and a hush fell over the audience. The moderator, a veteran science journalist from MIT Technology Review, welcomed everyone to the most anticipated session of the conference, Frontiers of Innovation, a conversation with Elon Musk. When Musk walked onto the stage in his characteristic dark blazer and open collar shirt, the audience erupted in applause. He smiled with that slightly awkward, boyish grin that had become his trademark, nodding in humble acknowledgement before taking his seat. For the next 45 minutes, he captivated the audience with insights about SpaceX's latest Mars mission simulations and breakthroughs in neural interface technology. His hands moved expressively as he spoke of humanity becoming a multi-planetary species, his eyes bright with conviction. The moderator skillfully guided the conversation through prepared questions, but everyone knew the real intellectual sparring would begin during the open Q&A session. Among those waiting in line at the audience microphone stood Dr. Lawrence Krauss, the renowned theoretical physicist whose books on cosmic origins had earned him both scientific respect and a reputation as one of atheism's most articulate champions. Tall and angular with silver-streaked hair, Krauss stood with arms crossed, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth as he waited his turn. When a moderator pointed to his microphone, a subtle but perceptible tension spread through the room. Many recognized Krauss immediately, and phones rose to record what promised to be a memorable exchange. "Mr. Musk," Krauss began, his voice carrying the practiced precision of someone accustomed to lecture halls and debate stages. "Your companies are built on rigorous application of scientific principles and evidence-based reasoning. Yet in previous interviews, you've made comments suggesting openness to the possibility of intelligent design in the universe." He paused, adjusting his glasses with one finger. "I'm genuinely curious how someone revolutionizing space travel through physics and engineering can simultaneously entertain what many would consider an outdated concept like a creator. Isn't this a fundamental contradiction in your worldview?" The question hung in the air, delivered with the slightly condescending tone of a professor correcting a promising but misguided student. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, eager to witness how the tech visionary would respond to this intellectual challenge. The moderator glanced at Musk with a look that silently offered an easy way out, a chance to deflect or move to another question. But Musk gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. For several seconds, Musk remained silent, his gaze directed somewhere in the middle distance. The pause stretched long enough that some wondered if he had even heard the question. Then he leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, fingers steepled in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, causing the entire audience to lean in. "You know, when I was younger, I would have completely agreed with the premise of your question." Musk began, his voice thoughtful rather than defensive. "I grew up with a scientist's mindset. If I couldn't measure it or derive it mathematically, I dismissed it. Black and white thinking felt clean, satisfying." He straightened slightly in his chair. "But the deeper I've gone into theoretical physics and cosmic mathematics, particularly while mapping interplanetary trajectories and studying the fundamental forces, the more I've encountered something unexpected." Musk's eyes narrowed slightly as he searched for the right words. "The universe reveals an astonishing mathematical precision in its fundamental constants. If the gravitational constant or the strength of the electromagnetic force differed by even 1 part in a billion, stars couldn't form, chemistry as we know it wouldn't exist, and life would be impossible." His hands sketched invisible equations in the air. "When you work with these numbers every day, as we do at SpaceX, plotting trajectories across millions of miles where the smallest miscalculation means complete mission failure, You develop a certain reverence for this precision. Krauss nodded slightly, his expression suggesting he was familiar with but unimpressed by this fine-tuning argument. He opened his mouth as if to interject, but Musk continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. I had a moment 3 years ago, working late at our facility in Hawthorne. We were running simulations on gravitational assist for the Europa mission, incredibly complex orbital mechanics. At 4 in the morning, staring at these elegant mathematical solutions that emerge from the fundamental constants of our universe, I had what I can only describe as a moment of awe. Musk's expression changed, becoming more vulnerable than most had ever seen from the typically reserved entrepreneur. I realized that maintaining absolute certainty in either direction about the deepest origins of these mathematical patterns might itself be an intellectual limitation. A subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of the auditorium. Even those who had been checking emails or scrolling through social media looked up, sensing something authentic and unscripted unfolding. Musk wasn't giving a prepared answer or defaulting to his usual talking points. He was sharing a genuine intellectual journey. What I've come to believe, Musk continued, his voice gaining quiet conviction, is that the most powerful stance isn't absolute certainty, but the courage to remain open to possibilities while continuing to rigorously explore. After all, isn't that the true spirit of scientific inquiry? The willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads, even if it challenges our existing frameworks. He leaned back slightly. I've found that embracing uncertainty rather than dogmatic positions on either side has been central to my most innovative thinking. As Musk spoke, something unexpected began happening across the stage. Krauss, who had begun with a somewhat dismissive posture, uncrossed his arms. His expression shifted from intellectual superiority to genuine attention, the change subtle but unmistakable to those watching closely. He unconsciously leaned forward, resting his weight on the audience microphone stand, a flash of genuine curiosity replacing his earlier certainty. History shows us that the greatest scientists maintained a profound sense of wonder about questions beyond current understanding. Musk continued, his voice carrying through the now silent auditorium. Einstein spoke of trying to understand the mind of God. Newton insisted he was merely picking up pebbles at the edge of a vast ocean of truth. These weren't just poetic metaphors, but acknowledgments of the humility required for true scientific advancement. The audience remained transfixed as Musk leaned forward with unexpected animation. During the darkest period of Tesla's production hell, when we were weeks from bankruptcy and I was sleeping on the factory floor, I experienced what you might call an existential crisis. He paused, glancing briefly at his hands. One night, reviewing the mathematics behind our autonomous navigation systems, essentially algorithms attempting to replicate human consciousness, I was struck by a question. How can we be so certain that consciousness itself is merely computational, a product of random processes, when we haven't even solved the hard problem of our own awareness? A low murmur spread through the audience. On stage, Krauss's posture had completely transformed. The physicist who had begun with arms crossed now sat perched at the edge of his stance, hand resting thoughtfully against his chin, his prepared rebuttal apparently forgotten. What I'm suggesting, Musk said, his voice gaining quiet strength, isn't blind faith or abandonment of scientific principles. I'm advocating for intellectual honesty about the boundaries of our current understanding. He gestured expansively. The universe contains approximately 10 to the power of 80 atoms. The potential neural connections in a single human brain outnumber the stars in our galaxy. Yet we somehow believe we've reached conclusive answers about the deepest questions of existence. Throughout the audience, expressions had shifted. Where there had been the usual conference mix of engagement and distraction, now there was focused attention. Several prominent scientists in the front rows exchanged glances that seemed to communicate mutual reassessment. The truly limiting perspective, Musk said, his voice now carrying a gentle but unmistakable conviction, isn't faith or skepticism itself, but rather the arrogance of absolute certainty in either direction. The most profound breakthroughs have consistently emerged from that humbling space between conviction and doubt, where questions remain more valuable than answers. As Musk spoke these words, Krauss visibly swallowed. His expression wasn't one of conversion or defeat, but of genuine intellectual engagement. The look of a true scientist encountering a perspective that, while perhaps not persuasive, was substantive enough to warrant serious consideration. I've spent my life building companies based on falsifiable hypotheses and measurable outcomes, Musk concluded. That scientific mindset remains my North Star. But I've also learned that the most dangerous intellectual position is believing we've reached the boundaries of what can be known or asked. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. The moderator, sensing the weight of the moment, allowed a few seconds of silence before asking, "Dr. Krauss, would you like to respond?" Krauss stepped forward to the microphone, his typical rapid-fire delivery noticeably absent. "I appreciate the thoughtfulness of that response," he began, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised those familiar with his usual polemical style. "While I maintain that the mathematical regularities of the universe can be explained through natural processes, I acknowledge there's beauty in maintaining what Carl Sagan called the wonder and awe that's the foundation of both science and spirituality." He paused, pushing his glasses up with one finger, a gesture that now seemed to signal consideration rather than dismissal. "What strikes me most in your response, Elon, is the emphasis on intellectual humility rather than certainty. That's something I can certainly agree with." A small smile crossed his face, though I suspect we might still differ considerably on the implications. The audience erupted in appreciative laughter, relieving the intensity that had built during the exchange. As applause filled the hall, cameras captured an unexpected moment. Rather than returning to his seat, Krauss approached the stage, extending his hand to Musk. The entrepreneur stood, and the two men shook hands warmly, exchanging words inaudible to the audience but accompanied by genuine smiles. As attendees filed out of the conference hall, the buzz was palpable. Small clusters formed in the lobby, animated discussions breaking out among people who had arrived as strangers but now found themselves united by what they had witnessed. "I didn't expect that level of philosophical depth from Musk," a Stanford professor remarked to her colleagues. He articulated something I felt but struggled to express in academic circles. The conversation that began on that stage quickly transcended the physical boundaries of the conference. Within hours, clips of the exchange flooded social media, garnering millions of views and sparking thousands of thoughtful comment threads that notably lacked the usual toxicity of internet discourse. The unexpected civility of the dialogue between two intellectual heavyweights seemed to inspire similar respect among those discussing it. Conference staff later reported finding Musk and Krauss in deep conversation in a quiet corner of the venue's restaurant, long after most attendees had departed. Their discussion continued for nearly 3 hours, punctuated by moments of animated disagreement, shared laughter, and the passing of napkins covered with hastily sketched equations and diagrams. 2 weeks after the conference, Krauss published a thoughtful essay titled "The Virtue of Unsettled Questions," reflecting on his exchange with Musk. While not abandoning his atheistic stance, he acknowledged that maintaining space for awe and uncertainty may be essential to both scientific advancement and meaningful human existence. The piece caused a stir in scientific circles, with several prominent rationalists expressing surprise at what they perceived as a softening of Krauss's typically uncompromising position. For his part, Musk returned to his relentless schedule of innovation and company building. Yet observers noted subtle shifts in his public remarks in subsequent interviews. When asked directly about his spiritual beliefs in a podcast appearance 3 months after the conference, he replied simply, "I believe the universe is vastly more complex and meaningful than our current frameworks, religious or scientific, can fully capture." The most honest position is wonder coupled with continued exploration. Perhaps most tellingly, Musk and Krauss announced a joint initiative 6 months after their encounter, an interdisciplinary research institute dedicated to exploring the philosophical implications of cutting-edge science and technology. While we approach these questions from different perspectives, their joint statement read, "We share a commitment to intellectual humility and meaningful dialogue across traditional boundaries." The ripple effects continue to spread. University classrooms incorporated the Musk-Krauss exchange into discussions about the philosophy of science. Religious leaders cited it as an example of respectful engagement between faith and reason. And countless individuals, after watching the interaction, found themselves reconsidering rigid positions they had held unexamined for years. What had begun as an attempted intellectual takedown had transformed into something neither man could have predicted, a model for how disagreement might serve as a catalyst for deeper understanding rather than further division. In a cultural moment dominated by polarization, their exchange offered a glimpse of a different possibility, one where opposing viewpoints could be held with both conviction and humility, where questions might be valued above answers. As news cameras were packing up after the conference that day, they captured one final moment between the two men. Standing at the exit, about to depart in separate directions, Musk said something that made Krauss laugh unexpectedly. Then, more seriously, Krauss reached out and placed a hand briefly on Musk's shoulder, a gesture of respect between intellectual equals. No words were exchanged in that moment, but none were needed. This encounter reminds us that in our age of certainty, where algorithms feed us only what reinforces our existing beliefs, the true act of courage may be intellectual humility. Both faith without questioning and skepticism without wonder can become forms of blindness, cutting us off from deeper understanding. What Musk and Krauss demonstrated was not weakness of conviction, but strength of character. The ability to hold space for both certainty and doubt, for both knowledge and wonder. Their dialogue offers a template for how we might approach our most divisive questions, not with the goal of winning arguments, but of expanding understanding. In the space between dogmatic faith and dogmatic skepticism lies a more fertile ground where authentic human connection and intellectual growth become possible. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone whose perspective differs from your own. Perhaps in that sharing, you might create a space for the kind of dialogue our divided world so desperately needs, one characterized not by who speaks loudest, but by who listens most deeply. Like this video, subscribe for more thought-provoking stories, and help spread conversations that matter. Conversations that remind us that wisdom begins not with answers, but with questions held in an open hand.